back to my channel. We are going to try to start putting some clay on this body. Now, folks, I want to just warn you right away that this is a video about making mistakes. But anyway, here's our head that we carved off camera. We didn't carve this one on a video to show you, but we have the legs, we have the arms. Everything looks pretty good at this point. So we're going to put everything aside and start with the torso because I think, first of all, I think it'll be the easiest one to mold and also the biggest piece to mold. So let's start with that, see if we can get this to work. And you'll see as we go through this, though, that I made so many mistakes. But the clay that I'm using is this air dry clay. It's La Dalle, and it's the one that's been suggested. I also thought initially I would use this roller because it has the little gadgets on the end to guide the depth of the clay as you roll it. But I realized as I got closer that that wasn't going to be big enough. I also did get this board because I didn't have anything really nice to roll out the clay on, so I got that. It's nice and smooth. It's for that purpose. And I do suggest that if you're going to do this, that you have something of that nature that you can roll out clay on that will be smooth and not stick to it. Sometimes glass works well, or maybe a glass cutting board, that kind of thing. Anyway, we're going to be using this clay, and as I said, I realized that that little small roller wouldn't work, so I ended up going with my kitchen roller. But it's nice because it has a sort of Teflon coating. And you can put like chopsticks or dowels under the sides so that you make sure you're rolling it at the same depth. I used these wooden dowels. I think in the book he uses some kind of chopsticks. But anyway, you want to make sure you get the right depth, and then you can use the foam core that you've carved as a guide for how much you need to cut out or how much you need to roll out of the clay. And once you have enough rolled out, then you can cut off any excess and then you start molding it. So I'm just going to use my X-Acto knife and cut off some of the excess rough edges here. I'm trying to keep, enough clay that this is going to be a substantial amount because remember the foam is going to be removed. So you want to have enough clay that it's going to hold the doll up, the body of the doll up. So this, I think, was probably the biggest struggle that I've had with this, is getting the styrofoam the right size to where you have enough, because you kind of want to mold the styrofoam initially the size of the doll. I mean, that's just kind of how you think. But as you'll see later, that really, it's so different. You really have to think about leaving enough room around the styrofoam for the clay so that the doll is the right size. So yeah, this is all about making mistakes. This is not the kind of channel you come to and I teach you how to do everything perfectly. This is about trying new things and all the things that you could do wrong and how to avoid them and do things better. So anyway, I start wrapping this clay around this styrofoam torso and trying to keep the right depth or thickness of the clay. And you have to be careful with that because as you start smoothing this out, there's a tendency for the clay to get a little bit thinner. But this is a little bit easier to work with in that respect than polymer clay, because polymer clay moves a lot, especially as it gets heated up from the heat of your hands. It just moves a lot, it thins out, and you end up getting a very misshapen look to it. Also, you'll notice here that the neck has fallen off of my styrofoam. So this is another little snafu that happened, but these things happen and you can fix these things. So yeah, so the neck fell off, but it's something that I need. So this is something you can repair. So I'm just going to use a toothpick and some glue to stick the neck back into the body so that I can use it to mold the clay around, because I do need the neck portion. Otherwise I would just get rid of it. Anyway, back wrapping this around the torso, and then what you're trying to do is to get a nice smooth texture to the clay, because this is going to be the body of your dog. And yeah, you can do some sanding and that sort of thing afterwards, but you want to get it as close as you can. The less you have to do, the better. So up at the neck, I'm doing some little divots. I'm carving out some davits in a triangular shape, and just, avoiding, you don't want to have to overlap the clay because that'll just make a bulge in it. So if you could just do some triangle shape cutouts, then you can just mold it so that it's smoother. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm starting to think that this body is too big. It just looks too big. It doesn't have the shape. Like when you look at the styrofoam without the clay, it looks okay because you can see the shape of the breast and the shape of the waist and the hips and the buttocks and all that. But when you start putting the clay on it, it just sort of started looking like a big blob, like a big column of clay, and didn't have a lot of shape to it. So I'm working along and I'm thinking, okay, this is just not really looking like a doll. It's not looking like a body. And at that point, I started to recognize that I was in trouble and that the styrofoam body that I had carved was just not small enough and detailed enough. I think you have to think about the detail as well, because it's like if you just have some subtle details on the styrofoam, once you put clay on top of that, those subtle differences are going to just disappear. So like the breast outline and the crevice between the breasts, that sort of thing. So yeah, I just sort of had to face it. This is not going to work, and there's only one option at this point, and that is to take the clay off and carve down the styrofoam some more so that it has more shape, and then put the clay back on. But one of the things you have to think about is with this clay, it's air dry clay, so you can't just take the clay off and spend some time working on the styrofoam. It'll just dry out and then you can't use it. So I decided to just make this incision down the back, hoping that I can salvage this clay because it's expensive and also hard to roll out and all that stuff. So I'm just using a Ziploc bag and I'm putting the clay in it, and I have a spray bottle with some water in it that I use frequently, and I just spray the clay with the water. And just like all the scraps of clay, I've kept those in a Ziploc bag also. Just spray them with some water and from your spray bottle, and they'll stay okay. So that ended up working okay. So I'm looking at my graph again and just thinking that I had enough of the styrofoam cut off. But when I look at it realistically, I really didn't have enough edges around the outside to account for the thickness of the clay that I needed. So just reevaluating all that again, and it meant a trip to Amazon to get a new file kit because what I had just wasn't working. So I had to wait a day, get this better file kit, and it has some small files, some big files, some finer grit and some larger grit. So I'm going to just start taking off some of the excess styrofoam and trying to get down to a little bit smaller size with a little bit more defined details between the breast and the hips and the waist and the buttocks, where all the details will show. So that's really what I'm going to be doing here over the next few seconds or minutes, depending on how fast this editing goes. This was an interesting process, and I mean, obviously I've never done this before. I'm trying to go by the book, but I think until you do things on your own, you don't really know how they're going to work out. And I've never worked with styrofoam like this anyway. The other thing I've realized that I had to go back to Amazon for was a little mini vacuum because the styrofoam goes everywhere. And not only does it go everywhere, but it has that static quality that sticks to everything. So even though you think you're brushing it off, it's sticking to you, and then you carry it to the rest of your house. So you have little white pellets all over your house. So lots of things to think about when you're doing a project like this. I would definitely suggest getting a nice file kit like this, and then also having a little vacuum, and just try to keep things cleaned up, because otherwise you're just spreading it everywhere. Keep an eye on your graph so that you know that you're getting it the right size, because if you don't, if the torso gets misshapen and doesn't fit up with the legs and the arms and the head, then nothing is going to fit. And at this point, I'm just like thinking to myself, I don't even know if I can do this. This is crazy. I don't even know why I'm trying to do this. But yeah, it's a project, something we need to work on, something we need to try. So I decided to keep going, just trying to think through how much of the styrofoam I need to remove to make it look more realistic with the thickness of clay that I need to put on it. And that's kind of how you need to think about it. You don't need to think about the styrofoam being the exact shape of the doll. It really needs to be a little bit exaggerated. So you can see I'm really removing quite a bit of the styrofoam and thinning down that waist, and making the breast a little bit more pronounced, and also sort of filing down how the hips, the bottom of the buttocks curve under. These are all things that will make it look more like a realistic body once you put the clay on it. All right, so spent a little bit of time cleaning up and came back feeling like I had taken off enough of the styrofoam that I could go back and work on my clay a little bit more. Did vacuum up all those styrofoam balls and they've gone everywhere. And then I take out my clay that fortunately is still workable and moist. Put the little cap back on the neck. Now obviously this is going to require some trimming because I've gotten rid of a lot of styrofoam, so I'm just going to have to measure and see how much of this I'm going to have to remove. Sometimes it's better to cut it off, because if you try to just smush it, you're going to end up with a lump and it won't look right. So just kind of keep that in mind. You want to just try to mold it so that it's even. That's the big thing, And I noticed that this was getting a little misshapen, so I actually took it off and ended up rolling it out again, trying to get it the right thickness so that it's more consistent. I think that's going to be really important to work on this doll. And this may end up being a complete disaster, who knows, but I mean, we'll go through the process. If you guys are interested in trying this yourself, maybe some of the things I do, the mistakes I made, you can avoid. But I think cutting off excess is better than trying to overlap it and mold it with your fingers. It's just, if you do that, it's just going to make it too lumpy. So as you can see, molding now, trying to get it down to this smaller shape, and making sure that I'm pressing down into the crevices, especially like between the breast and the buttocks area where these details are located. Again, making some triangular cuts up around the neck to get rid of excess clay. You can even use scissors if you need to. Whatever works in this process, I think. You just do it. But smooth, molded is the best. I am going to be able to do some sanding and fine-tuning afterwards, but the less of that you have to do, the better. You want to get this as smooth as you can with your fingers ahead of time, so when it dries, you don't have to deal with it. When this dries, it's really very light. You'll be surprised. Like, you know, it's a little bit heavy with the when you're working with it because it has a lot of water content in it. But once that dries out, this is a very, very light clay. It's not like polymer, which is a little bit heavier. But I do like the fact that working with this, it doesn't move around as much as polymer. So it kind of stays put where you mold it. And you don't have to worry so much about it thinning out in some areas as you're, you know, pressing it in, which you would if it was polymer. You press in one area and it thins out in another. But I think it's starting to take a little bit better shape now. I'm pretty happy with how it's looking. Just trimming off any excess that we have. I think we'll be able to do a little bit of filing and make it look a little bit better afterwards. But anyway, I think it's coming along, and this will be the end of this first part of the video. Then we'll be working on the arms and the legs and the head, and putting, you know, those pieces. Hopefully they're small enough that I won't have to redo them like I did this torso. But it's an interesting process. I mean, I think anybody who is actually doing this and making dolls must be a very, very talented artist, and I have the utmost respect for them because this is not easy. So guys, stay tuned. Hopefully, you know, we'll get through this and we'll come up with something that looks at least a little bit like a doll, and the mistakes that I make, you won't have to. Anyway, enjoy the video, and hopefully I'll be back soon with some arms, legs, and heads, and we'll continue this process and see if we can make what looks like a doll. Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.